Jessica Ferne. Ferne. Director of Global Health Impact, Canadian Partnership for Women and Children's Health. As Director of Global Health Impact, Jessica leads CanWaCH's strategic efforts to strengthen Canadian monitoring and evaluation processes, capacity and collaboration, in order to drive evidence-driven programming and decision-making. Previously, she has worked in diverse senior program management, public health research, and evaluation positions in Canada and internationally, including most recently as Director of Programs for the International Development and Relief Foundation, where she has led an extensive portfolio of emergency response and development programs across several continents. Jessica is the current Vice President of the Board of Directors for the Ontario Council for International Cooperation and is a member of the Board of Canadian Coalition for Global Health Research and Penny Appeal of Canada. And she's addressing the women and girls' potential for reversing global warming.
So continue here. Oh, thank you very much. Basically, that Leo just says I'm very smart. Great. So I'm actually not going to stray too far from this table because if just given a mic, will talk for this entire amount of time. So I actually have to give myself a time check right here. So I'll be able to actually check and see if I'm talking for too long. So this is the second time I've ever been invited to speak to a group of people who are interested in climate and climate justice. And that is interesting to me, and it makes me really nervous because I actually, first of all, I think it's funny how we tend to define ourselves in certain ways. So I define myself as a health rights advocate, a reproductive justice advocate, I am a humanitarian aid worker. I typically align myself explicitly as an environmental justice advocate. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the work that my organization and others like ours have been up to, and how I'm starting to see just how unhelpful those distinctions and those linkages are. So I'll do my level best to bring the kind of rights-based lens that I bring to the work that I do in global public health and global gender equality work to the same rights-based approach to environmental sustainability. So there's a base. So before I go too much further, I realize that not everybody here knows or may know about what your Canadian government does in regards to gender equality. And I think that that's an important place to start. I'm going to hazard a guess that you're all pretty well informed and have been well informed on a lot of the money or lack of money that has gone into environmental justice and climate change, but maybe not gender so much. So going way back to 2010, the Canadian government first made something that was called the Muskoka Commitment. I don't know if anybody here knows about that, but basically that was a commitment of $2.85 billion over 5 years to maternal, newborn, and child health. All right, so within that broad category, though, we started to see a little bit of rumblings of understanding that there were important linkages for women and girls and maternal, newborn, and child health with the environment. So we saw increased investments in things like water and sanitation, food security, and nutrition-based programs in that time. That was under Prime Minister Harper. Then Trudeau comes in, and we, just before he does, we see a renewed commitment in Muskoka 2 of $3.5 billion, carrying us through to next year, 2020. That money also took a slightly broader approach, but still had very explicit references to the environment and environmental sustainability. But then, in 2016, something interesting happened, and we got something called the FIA, or the Feminist International Assistance Policy. Does anyone know what that is? Okay, so, oh yeah, you do. Great. So the feminist, and if I could walk over there, I would ask you to tell the good people. But your Canadian government has established something called the Feminist International Assistance Policy. This is a policy that guides all the work that Canada invests in internationally, and within the FIAP is an explicit reference to gender equality, of course, because it is our first ever feminist explicit policy, but also very clear directive for the government to be considering issues of climate and the environment in its international aid. This guides absolutely everything we do, so it's already established in our development rhetoric. And then, does anybody, I mean obviously you know who this is, But do you know where he is in this photo? Anybody? Raise your hand if you know where he is.
Deliver.
He's at Women Deliver, that's right. What was Women Deliver?
It was an international forum held in June in Vancouver.
Yeah. Were you there?
No, I was supposed to be. I couldn't.
Well, I was there, and let me tell you, announcements were made. So there were two series, you did hear that, in June of this year, Canada hosted something called the Women Deliver Conference. This is like the Olympics, but for gender equality. So countries bid to host this massive conference, and every 3 years, people from around the world get together and they talk about issues relating to gender and rights. And Canada made two, among many, made two very important commitments at that time, notably titled the June 2nd commitment and creatively titled as well the June 4th commitment. So the June 2nd commitment is a commitment made by the department, through the Department of Women and Gender Equality, which matches $30 million in federal funding to gender equality efforts. That includes work happening domestically with Indigenous rights, with Indigenous women's groups, and also other marginalized groups, which totals up to $1 million annually, or just around $1 billion in resources until 2015. There is money allocated within that budget specifically for issues relating to the environment and climate change that we can be tapping into. There was also the June 4th announcement, and this is what my organization is very heavily involved in. This is something that we've kind of affectionately called the Thrive Agenda. And this was developed through a coalition of efforts of different domestic and global rights leaders, including organizations that you know and love, who came together to make a unified request for the government to invest in global health and gender equality, which included a commitment to environmental justice. And that commitment was made, this is him making that announcement right there, of $1.4 billion a year over 10 years, or $14 billion. That is the largest single commitment that has ever been made by this government in terms of both duration, so it's a 10-year commitment rather than the usual 5 like we had before, and the largest in dollar value. So the reason I tell you all of this, and I take you through that, is to kind of make the point that, first of all, Canada has established that it is willing to be certainly a financial leader when it comes to gender equality and rights, but also that there is money on the table for a lot of the advocacy work that we are talking about when it comes to gender equality. And I think that that is important to reflect on when we think about how we all work together as advocates to achieve the goals that we have. A lot of times we talk about making additional commitments above and beyond without stopping to look at what other commitments exist and how can we work together on that. True story, that is one of my slides, and I've been talking for 6 minutes. So, I'm going to kind of quickly jump ahead to a few things, and I want to end with some resources that I hope will help you, and if we have time, we can kind of go back. But I think the real point I'll spend the rest of my time talking about is the linkage between gender and climate. Because I think a lot of people think it's a bit of a long walk. Or like, yeah, women and girls, they also are affected by the environment. But one of the key ways, one of the very specific ways where we can draw strong linkages between gender justice and environmental justice is with population and population growth. So basically we know our planet is expanding. It's expanding rapidly, and it's not expanding evenly. So just because we see population growth happening doesn't mean it happens in the same countries or at the same rates. And not too surprisingly, and I'm a data person, if you were to take a map and you were to map out all the countries that are seeing particularly high rates of population growth, and you were to take a map and look at countries that are particularly vulnerable to the climate crisis, they would overlap. You would also know that our population is getting, as a planet, it's getting younger. So, of course, we don't see this maybe quite as much in Canada, but globally, the population of youth is getting larger and larger. And that intersects with gender and climate justice when we talk about population health, specifically reproductive health. And one of the things that I think links reproductive health, population health, and environment particularly is this issue of norms, laws, and ethics. Reproductive health and rights is still a contentious issue, much in the same way that environment and climate change action is still sometimes seen as a contentious issue. Generally speaking, we're all willing to get behind initiatives that relate to things like education. That's not a particularly contentious topic. But if we talk about issues like abortion and access to safe and legal abortion, all of a sudden the issues of individual country laws, rights, and norms become really, really pressing. And I think that if we work together as gender rights advocates and as climate rights advocates, we can actually bridge a lot of our shared goals and shared interests. So the last thing that I will talk about is, you asked, what are some calls to action? What are some things that we can think about? As a data person, I'm most interested in telling the stories of our impact, and that means not just collecting useful data, but it means also telling the qualitative and the quantitative stories that matter and that can really compel people. And so one resource that I think I'd like to make available to all of you that you might find useful is a survey that my organization did. Hold on, let me get to it. Not all this, trust me. Okay, so our organization was involved in conducting a great survey of Canadian attitudes with CanWaCH, which is a very well-known national company. And we looked specifically at what issues concern Canadians when it comes to health, gender equality, and international aid. And interestingly enough, when we ask people to talk about the issues that most concern them, you can see that climate change, environment, pollution, food security issues all ranked very, very high, both in terms of Canada's interests domestically and Canada's interests globally. This is really important information for you to use when you're talking to your political leaders, trying to make the case that this is an issue that is actually going to further their agenda and get them reelected. We have information even broken down by province, seeing here, for example, that tackling climate change is seen as being the third highest ranked in our survey around importance and benefits to Canadians. There's a full methodology, lots of great data that you can use to really make the case to people that this is something that they should be focusing on and investing on, and that all of these issues are linked. So I will stop there, but if you'd like more information on that study or how you can use it in your own work, please don't hesitate to let me know.
So you can see, gender and environment are complex, interweaving, interwoven issues that might not be intuitively obvious on first inspection, but thanks, Jessica, for bringing those connections together.